Good afternoon, this is Terry from the Frugal Connection. Welcome to my kitchen. I want to make some curried butternut squash soup with you today. I'm prepping my dinner for tonight. I have to go grocery shopping at some point this week, but what I'm trying to do is use up the things that I have in my freezer, in my pantry, and make it work. I want to invite you along with me while I cook this. I'm going to turn the camera around and I'm going to show you the ingredients that we are working with today, and then we're going to get started making this together. Okay, let me show you what we're working with for this cooking project today. I have a butternut squash that I pulled out of my freezer. I actually roasted this and then scooped out the filling and then froze it for a later date. So this is partially frozen, but it will still work with what we need it for. Then I have a can of cannellini beans here. I have garlic, I have onions. I do need to get a fresh piece of fresh ginger out of my freezer. And then I have cinnamon, curry powder, black pepper. That is Himalayan pink sea salt in that grinder. I have coriander, I have maple syrup, and I have water. You can also use vegetable broth, and normally I would use that for this recipe, but I don't have any. So I'm using up what I have in my house. All right, my friends, the first thing we're gonna start with is we're gonna take our onion. You can use yellow onions or Spanish style onion. These happen to be candied onions that I got from the local farmer's market. I personally, they always say that they're sweeter onion than others, but I can't tell the difference. So I'm just gonna go ahead and use this because, like I said, this is a use up my pantry type meal, and I wanna use what I have without having to run to the store. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut that onion in half. I cut off the ends so that when I try to cut it in half, it doesn't roll around and I don't risk cutting myself. And then I'm gonna take this peeling off the outside, if I can get it off. All right, and I'm gonna do the same thing with the other. And I'm gonna just grab a little bowl to throw all my compost stuff in it. Okay, so I'm just basically cutting this. I'm cutting this onion, I'm dicing the onion. I'm cutting it into small little pieces. And we're gonna start with that. Now, in a few minutes, I'm gonna take you over to my stove top and show you what I'm gonna do with this. Now, this is just a one pot meal, which is wonderful. So it doesn't dirty a lot of dishes. In fact, pretty much the only thing I'm going to be using is my cutting board, my knife, my little grater, and the pot, and that's it. Okay, so there's my onion, and now I'm going to dice or mince 2 garlic cloves. Now, I've been missing in action on this channel for a while, and some of that is we just had such a busy season. This summer was, we had just a busy summer, and I just found that it was going to stress me out more to do videos than it wasn't. So I just decided, oh well, I'm just going to take a break. But I'm chomping at the bit to be back because it's the new year. If you're new here, I eat a plant-based whole food diet, and I don't eat any processed sugars, no processed food, just basically whole grains, beans and legumes, tofu, lots of fresh vegetables, lots of fruit, and I cook basically with no oil, no added sugars, salt, stuff like that. I do use a little bit of salt, but I try to really minimalize that. And I started this channel back in 2024, I believe, and I've lost 73 pounds eating this way. But I did find over the Christmas break, because I started eating and sampling things that I normally don't eat, that I gained back about 10 pounds, like just within a few weeks. So I know for a fact that sugar for me is something I need to stay away from. So that may be the case with you too. So I just want to offer some recipes and some tips on how to cook this way and do it in a way that doesn't break the bank. Okay, so I have the peel off the garlic. I hate peeling garlic, it's so sticky. It's just yuck. Okay, here we go. So I'm just gonna give this a really fine mince. This soup comes together so quickly and so easily, especially if you do the work ahead of time of roasting your butternut squash. So, or you could buy it frozen in the store. That's a great option this time of year when it's winter and you know there's nothing is being grown locally if you happen to live in a snow area where like I live. So frozen vegetables are a great economical option, and they actually sell butternut squash in the freezer section in my store, and I just find that you know it's quick, it's easy, I don't have to mess with the peeling or any of that stuff. But I have found a really good trick with dealing with whole butternut squash is I cut it in half lengthwise, I scoop out the seeds, I put it in a baking pan upside down or face down so that the fleshy part is facing the pan, and I roast it at 350 for about an hour or until it's super soft, and then I pull it out, let it cool, and then I just scoop out the flesh, and it's great. I don't have to mess with peeling it because butternut squash is one of those things that is really hard to peel. All right, so now the only other prep work I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my little piece of frozen ginger. I peel mine, I buy it, I peel it, and then I cut it into the size pieces I want and store it in a freezer bag so it's always at the ready when I need fresh garlic. And I am just going to grate this until I get what I want. And all the stringy part of the ginger I am going to toss once I'm done with it. I love cooking, making plant-based whole food recipes. I just find that it's so fun. I love being creative in the kitchen, and it's just a great opportunity to use fruits, vegetables, whole grains in a way that is fun, exciting, nutritious, and yet again, it doesn't cost a fortune. Fruits and vegetables are not expensive. Beans and legumes are not expensive, as well as whole grains. In fact, probably the priciest thing of all those is some of the whole grains. But again, I'm trading off my health for a little bit of extra money, but in the long run, I find that I have saved money on my grocery bill eating and cooking this way. Okay, we are going to move to my stove, and I'm going to show you the next step. Okay, friends, I'm starting with a good quality nonstick pan, and I am turning my heat on. I'm going to start on medium, and then I will turn it down once this gets going. And basically what I'm going to do is I am going to take my onions and I'm just going to add them right into this pan. Now I do not use oil when I saute my vegetables, and that is because oil just adds extra calories that I don't need. It has no nutritional value. Even things like olive oil does not. But it adds a whole lot of calories to whatever you're eating, because generally a tablespoon of oil is 120 calories. Okay, so I'm going to let this get going, and I will meet you back here when it starts to soften up so you can see the next step. All right, friends, what you will start to notice, you see how they're starting to glisten a little bit? I did add a little pinch of salt. Now again, salt is not necessary. You don't need to add that. I just found for myself it doesn't affect me health-wise, as long as I keep it to a minimum. And then once I start adding tons and tons of salt, then yeah, that becomes a problem. But you're gonna just keep letting this cook very low and slow. Once it got started, I turned my heat down to medium-low. And if it does start to stick at all, I have a little jar of water here, and I will just add about a tablespoon of water at a time just to let it loosen it up from the pan. Onions aren't so bad. I find onions don't stick too much unless I start out too high. The problem comes when I'm doing garlic, because garlic can stick and burn really easily, so you have to watch that. And generally what I'll do is I will place my garlic like right on top of the onions and just keep a really good eye on it. And again, I add a little bit of water as needed. I'm going to continue to cook this low and slow until they're totally soft, and then I will add in the garlic. Friends, I want to show you what I'm talking about. It is, as you can see, it is starting to stick just a little bit, not very much, but I really don't want this to stick at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pour in about a tablespoon of water. And it immediately releases from the pan. And it does steam a little bit, but again, that will evaporate. And once you do all of this, you cannot tell the difference. Like, I add this to different sauces and soups and stews that I'm making, and I don't use the oil, and I literally cannot tell the difference that there's no oil in it at all. All right, now I did add in a little bit more water because it was starting to stick again, and you will find that that will probably happen a couple of times, and you just, again, just a tablespoon of water at a time as needed. Let it evaporate, let them soften up, and again, if you need to do it again, you just add it as you need it. All right, so now to this, I am going to add in my garlic, and I'm just going to try to lay that on top a little bit so that it doesn't start sticking to the pan immediately. I'll stir it around in a second. And I'm also going to add in my fresh ginger, which I grated. And I just used a little microplaner for this. You can certainly just mince it yourself with a knife if you don't have one of those. But I like doing it this way because it just gives me I don't have such a big bite of of ginger, sorry. But if you don't have a microplaner and you just want to use a knife, just mince it super fine. Again, this is about using what you have, not spending a fortune on fancy gadgets, fancy equipment. Just make it work. And that is the point. You know, not everything is as beautiful. Like you see on some YouTube channels, they have these professional commercial-sized kitchens. Lots of people, I think the majority of people in this world live in tiny little houses like I do, with tiny little kitchens that you have to make work. All right, so let me let that go for a minute. I'm going to add just a smidge of water because it is sticking a little bit. Oh my word, that ginger smells amazing. All right, friends, as I mentioned, I live in a tiny house with a tiny kitchen, and so I make this work the best I can. And if I'm not filming, it works fine. If I'm filming, it just requires some creativity. All right, so now my vegetables are nice and soft, as you can see. They're translucent. That's exactly what we want. We don't want bites of raw vegetables in our soup. I cut up my butternut squash to make it just more manageable, and I am going to put this in here. Now again, this is going to be quick and easy because I'm using pre-cooked butternut squash, which you can totally prep ahead of time. You do not need to start, just put raw squash in your soup because you'll have to use a lot more broth and it'll take forever to cook. So this way, all I'm going to do at this point is let this thing heat up. And I am going to add to this I'm I'm gonna start with just a cup of water. This is 2 cups, but I'm gonna start with half of this just to see how we're doing. Because the thing with butternut squash, you want it to be thick. You don't want a soupy squash soup. That doesn't sound appealing to me. And now, and ideally I would have used vegetable broth. I do make my own vegetable broth. I save all my vegetable scraps and peelings and everything in a bag in my freezer. And then when I get enough, I put them in a big stock pot, cover it with water, add some bay leaves, some salt, some pepper, and let it simmer for a few hours, and then strain it and either pressure can it, or I just store it in my freezer in like Rubbermaid containers, and then I pull out what I want when I want it. But I used up my last thing of vegetable broth a few days ago. Now to this, it has not started simmering yet, but that's okay. I am going to add in our spices now. Let me get those. So to this soup, what I'm going to add now is I'm going to put in 1.5 teaspoons of curry powder. I am going to add 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. I'm going to add about 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. I'm actually going to add about 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. And I'm going to add 1/4 teaspoon of ground coriander, which is totally optional. You don't need to add this, but I like it, so that's what I'm using. Now, the only thing I'm going to do is the can of cannellini beans and the maple syrup. I'm going to wait and add that last. I'm going to let this simmer together. First of all, I'm going to stir it up, and then I'm going to let all these flavors meld together. I'm going to bring it to a simmer and then simmer it for about 10 minutes, because really what I want is I just want all these flavors to come together. I want the squash to unfreeze because it was still partially frozen. I want the onions, the garlic, the ginger, the coriander, cinnamon, curry powder. I am going to add a couple of grinds of the salt to it. That was about 3. I'm going to put the lid on it and just let it simmer a little bit, and I will meet you back here. Friends, let me show you what this looks like. This is my squash. It's all melded together with the other ingredients. It smells amazing. I put my spices away. I cleaned up my kitchen. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in my cannellini beans. And I do think I'm going to add about 1 cup more water to this, because it's gotten a little thick. All right, I'm going to still let that simmer some. I'm going to bring it back up to a simmer. Now at this point, what you could have done instead of that extra cup of water or extra cup of broth is you could add in 1 can of coconut milk. Now I find, because I'm trying to keep my fat content down and things, that I use light coconut milk when I do use it, but that would be a great addition to this dish. I just, again, don't have any, and I'm trying to use what I have in my kitchen. And the reason I'm adding the beans to this, just so that you know, because otherwise that's going to seem strange, is that the beans give you protein. So this makes this a complete meal. You have your vegetable, you have your protein, you have just, you know, add some creaminess to the dish, especially since I'm not using coconut milk. And it just kind of bulks it up so that I don't eat it and then I'm hungry in an hour. Now, the other thing I am going to add to this is I'm going to add in 2 tablespoons of pure maple syrup. Now again, that is totally optional. You do not need to do that. I'm just doing it because I think butternut squash, it goes well with it. It gives it some extra sweetness and a good flavor. All right, so I'm gonna let this go for about 5 minutes just to bring it back up to a good simmer, and then I'm gonna meet you back here and show you the next step with this soup. All right, friends, I have to apologize. Earlier I said the only piece of equipment you would need is a pot and a cutting board and a knife. I forgot the most crucial piece of ingredient or piece of equipment, and that is a high-speed blender or an immersion blender would work as well, because you do want this smooth. You don't want stringy, you know, because butternut squash can be stringy. You don't want stringy soup at all. So we're gonna blend this up. I poured it into my NutriBullet high-speed blender, and I am gonna put the lid on, and I'm gonna start out on low, and then increase the speed as needed. You want to be careful with hot liquids, so it's always best to not overfill it, to start it on low. All right. And just be careful taking the lid off, because again, you don't want to burn yourself. This has turned out so thick, so creamy. Oh, and one of the reasons, I forgot to mention that the reason I added a little bit of maple syrup to my soup is that it cuts some of that super hard bite of the curry powder, of the ginger, of the garlic, and it just gives it it's a great flavor, it really is. All right, here we go. I'm gonna pour it right back into my pan. And at this point, you're really done. I mean, if you want to keep it warm in a crock pot, you can do that if you're not ready for dinner. So you can certainly make this ahead of time. You can reheat it on the stove, in the microwave, whatever you want. But it smells really good. And I'm going to dish up a little bit of this and give it a taste, and tell you what I think. Now, one of the things that you could add to this, just to give it a little crunch at the top, is some raw pepitas. That would work, which are raw pumpkin seeds. Or whole pumpkin seeds, I should say. Okay, well, let me set this to the side. There you have it. Butternut squash soup. Yum. All right, let me give this a little taste test. It's nice and thick, which for this kind of soup, that's what I like. If you don't like it that thick, you want to make it thinner, just add more broth or add more water, whatever you prefer. That is so good. Oh my word. It's just a hint of sweetness from the butternut squash, which has kind of a natural sweetness to it, and the maple syrup. But then you have the curry powder and the coriander, and the beans give it some bulk, so you'll feel full after you eat this. This is very, very good. I will type up this recipe. I will post it on my blog, which is on my website, thefrugalconnection.com. I will put the link down below in the description box, and I hope you will give this one a try. I am going to attempt to post more than I have been. I took a break for quite a few months. I am having cataract surgery this week, so hopefully I will be able to somewhat see the next, we're doing the first eye, and then in 2 weeks we're doing the second eye. So hopefully by that point I will be able to see without my glasses, at least a distance, and things should be good. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.